everyone and welcome to my craft room. I'm Leo from inkymemories.co.uk. I'm an independent Stampin' Up demonstrator based in South Wales, and today on this Workshop Wednesday project we're going to be using the Sweet Strawberry bundle, and this is coming in, it's available in your January to June mini catalogue on page 44, and it comes as a bundle, so with the stamp set and the punch, and buying them as a bundle together means you save 10% over buying the two products individually, so always a great deal to buy bundles. The card we're going to be making today is a birthday card. It is time for me to start ramping up my birthday card production for the year. I'm always in the need for birthday cards. This is a great time to get started. Now, unlike most Workshop Wednesday projects, I have done a little bit of my cutting ahead of time just to get some things sort of sped up today. So the card base I'm going to be using is in Balmy Blue, which is a card colour that I don't think we've used so far, but it's actually a really gorgeous pale blue. So this is just a standard half sheet of A4, so it's 14.85 by 21 and scored at 10.5. I then have a matte also in Balmy Blue, and this is 14.35 by 10. And I then have two white mattes. These are just in basic white, and these measure 13.35 by 9, so one for the front and one for the inside. And then I also have just a scrap piece of basic white cardstock here that we're going to be using for some stamping and punching. Now, if you haven't heard already, Whisper White has retired and it has been replaced with basic white. All of the same products that we had before, so the same cardstock in the standard weight, and the thick weight, note cards and envelopes, everything that we had before in Whisper White is now available in basic white, and you'll see those now on the Stampin' Up website as well. So let us get started. I'm going to get a whole load of stamping done. First of all, we have quite a bit of stamping in today's project. So I'm going to pop my card base and the mat to one side, and I'm going to keep all of my pieces of basic white. It's going to take me a while to get used to this change, I think. So let me start off first of all then with what we are going to be stamping. So from the stamp set, I've pulled out a bunch of these stamps. So I have this large sort of leaf and flower spray here, the larger outlined flower. I've got the two steps for the strawberry and the stems, and I've also got the sentiment "Happy Birthday, You Sweet Thing," and I've got these already mounted up on some clear blocks for me here. So the first one I'm going to be using is that large strawberry leaf and flower spray design, and I'm going to stamp this in Memento ink today. So first of all, I'm going to stamp the inside of my card. As you know, I always like to add a little something to the inside just to make sure that it is as pretty as the outside too. I am still waiting on envelopes, so currently no envelopes to be stamped today, but we'll be doing plenty of other stamping, don't worry. So for the inside of the card, I'm just going to stamp this spray once, just in the bottom right hand corner, just going off the edge of the card like so. Now this would be a great time if you wanted to add a sentiment inside your card, or another verse of some variety. Anything you want to put in there, add that in as well. I'm going to re-ink my stamp. Now, because I'm using Memento ink for this today, as I've mentioned before, the ink pad for this is a little bit firmer than Stampin' Up's classic ink pad, so you do need to press a little harder to get your to get your stamp nicely inked up. So just bear that in mind when you are using your Memento. And I'm going to just do a background pattern of this sort of leaf and flower design all over this front mat of my card here. Trying not to leave any sort of huge gaps if I can possibly avoid it. Last bit just in this corner here. There we go. Now this part will actually end up being covered up by my sentiment, so I'm happy with that. So that is all of the stamping I'm doing with the Memento and with that particular stamp. So I'm going to pop that out of the way. No, one more bit of Memento, sorry, my apologies. So on my scrap piece here, I have that large flower image. I'm just going to stamp this in Memento as well. This is the last thing I'm stamping in Memento today. So I'm just going to pop that down into the corner, and now I can close up my Memento pad. We are done with that. Next up then, we're going to do some stamping for some of the other pieces. So I've got here the Granny Apple Green stamping ink pad. And I'm going to bring in the two parts of the sort of flower, strawberry stem, sorry. So you've got the background part and then the outline part. So with the background part, first of all, I'm going to ink this up, so just some nice light taps onto the surface of my ink pad. I want to stamp this off to get rid of most of the ink on there, and then just stamp it down onto my paper, and I'm going to repeat that again. So stamp off and then stamp that down on there. And then I'm going to take the outline stamp, ink that up in exactly the same way, so just some nice light taps on there. Line it up as best as you can with the background stamp and then press it down, and repeat that for the second one. So just taking a moment to get that as lined up as possible. There we go. So that's all the stamping that I need in Granny Apple Green, so I can pop that to one side as well. And I'm going to bring in some Poppy Parade ink for the next bit of stamping here. And this time I have the two strawberry images, so the background and the outline. And I'm going to basically repeat what I've done for the flower stems. So I'm going to ink up the background piece, just lightly tapping that onto my ink pad. Stamp that off to get rid of quite a lot of the ink. And then press that down nice and firmly onto my paper. And then I'm going to repeat that again a second time because I want two strawberries. Just like that. And then I'm going to take the outline image, ink that up too. So again, nice light taps onto the surface of my ink pad. Line that up with the background image. Press it down nice and firmly. And repeat that for the second strawberry. I love this stamp with its little strawberry seeds in there as well. Okay, so there are my two strawberries. We are almost done with the stamping. The last thing that I need to stamp then is the sentiment for the front of my card, and I'm going to be doing this in Balmy Blue to go with our card base. And like I said, the sentiment that I've chosen is "Happy Birthday, you sweet thing." So I'm just going to ink up this stamp again, nice light taps onto the surface of my ink pad. And I'm going to pop this slightly away from the edge of my cardstock. I'm going to be punching this out, so I want to make sure that I have plenty of room to get my punch exactly where I want it to be around my sentiment. Okay. Next up, we're actually going to be doing a little bit of colouring, and today the colour method I've chosen is the watercolour pencil. So I'm choosing the watercolour pencils assortment 2. There's a couple of colours in here that I want to use. So I have the Garden Green and the Granny Apple Green. I want the Flirty Flamingo and the Crushed Curry colours. And I'm going to take my front mat first of all. We're going to do a little bit of colouring on there. So I'm going to take first of all the Granny Apple Green pencil, and I'm just going to lightly colour a good amount of colour onto each of the leaves on the mat that I have for the front of my card. Now it doesn't need to go right to the edge, it doesn't need to be, neat colouring here. Try not to go outside of the lines. Definitely stay within the lines, but we are going to be blending this colour once we are done with it all, and that will pull it right to the edges, so you don't need to worry about being too precise with this. So I'm just going to colour all of the leaves that we have on the front of here with a base layer of the Granny Apple Green first of all. So now that I have a base layer of Granny Apple Green on all of those leaves, I'm going to go back over the top with some Garden Green. And again, you don't need to be too neat with this. We are going to be blending these colours together in a moment. And the reason that I have chosen to mix the two colours together is just to give a nice vibrant bright green. I found the Granny Apple Green on its own was a little too yellowy, and the Garden Green on its own was just a little too sort of dark. It wasn't quite the right shade of green for strawberry leaves. So putting the two together gave a really nice bright strawberry leaf green to use on my card front. The next colour I'm going to use then is the Flirty Flamingo. Now I don't want to leave my strawberry flowers completely white. I want to give them just the barest hint of colour. So I'm literally going to add a very tiny amount of the Flirty Flamingo pencil onto the petals of my flowers here. Trying not to get it into the centres. I want to give them some nice bright yellow centres using the crushed curry pencil. So for this one, very light pressure going on. We don't want the flowers to be really pink. We just want them to have that sort of barest hint of colour so they're not stark white. And then finally I'm going to take the crushed curry and give the open flowers a nice bright yellow centre. So now that I have all of my colour laid down onto my mat, I'm going to do one more of these flowers in exactly the same way. So a crushed curry centre and a bit of Flirty Flamingo onto the edges of those petals, just on this larger flower that we stamped here. And then I'm going to take a blender pen. Now these can be found in your annual catalogue. These are amazing things. So basically it's just a sort of glycerin and water mix in here, and it just allows you to move that colour around from your coloured pencils. It sort of blends the two together. Softens up all of your pencil lines as well, so you won't have any of those sort of harsh colouring scribbles, and it just moves the ink around. So this is why I said you don't need to worry too much about making sure that your pencil colouring goes right to the very edges of your leaves. And you can just brush over these to blend all of the leaf colour together. So now that my leaves are all gorgeously blended together, I'm going to wipe the ink off the end of my blender pen by just rubbing it onto my grid paper until it goes clear. And then I'm going to blend my flowers. So first of all, I'm going to just do the centres. Just move that pencil around a little bit so we get that nice bright yellow pollen centre in there. And again, just rub off any yellow that we have on there. Once you're happy that it's clear, you can then go over that sort of whisper of the Flirty Flamingo colour that you added to those flowers and just blend that in as well. And don't forget to do the large flower that we stamped onto that piece of scrap basic white. So again, I'm just blending that pink just to really tone it down and then make that yellow centre nice and vibrant. Okay, finish off by getting rid of any excess ink left on your blender pen and pop the lid back on that. That is our colouring done, so I shall get those out of the way. So now I'm going to do a little bit of punching now that we have all of our stamping done. So there's a couple of additional punches that I'm going to bring in here. I have the 2-inch circle punch and this is the small bloom punch, and both of these can be found in your annual catalogue. And of course I'm going to be using the strawberry builder punch that comes in the bundle that we're using today. So first of all, I'm going to take my 2-inch circle punch and I want to punch out my sentiment. Now with this, I want the sentiment to go as far down the circle as it can whilst still fitting within the circle. So you will find it will go beyond the sort of halfway point and still fit nicely into that circle without chopping off any of the sentiment. So you end up with some white space at the top. Once you're happy with the positioning, just punch that through. And that is our sentiment punched out for the front of our card. And then I'm going to take my small bloom punch and take out this larger flower that we did onto the scrap piece here. So again, just line up the punch, make sure you've got that nicely centered in there, and pop that through. And now that we've done those, it's time to get these pieces done. Now with this, you may find that you need to cut up your cardstock so that you're not punching one with sort of the builder punch, and I'll try and explain a little bit what I mean. So with the builder punch, because you have all of these different openings for the different shapes, depending on how you have stamped, say your stems or your strawberries, you may need to cut them off separately so that your next stem isn't being punched by part of the other punch shapes on the punch. I've managed to space my stems out okay, so I can do it all in one go. So there is my first strawberry stem. And then if I move this along, I will need to cut this down ever so slightly just to actually fit it into the punch. So I'm just going to cut through that bit that I've punched out. And then feed this stem into the side. I need to cut that a tiny bit more. Let's actually just cut this bit off, just to make this a little easier. So there we go, that's much easier. I can now feed this in, line it up into my punch, and then punch that, get rid of all of those excess pieces. So there are my two strawberry stems punched out. Now I need to work on my strawberries. So again, you may find that you do need to crop these down. So you can see here what I was saying. If I was to punch this strawberry, you can see that the second strawberry is going to get punched by this leaf part here. So instead, I'm going to take my scissors and just roughly chop up this side and then cut my two strawberries to separate them. And then I can feed my cardstock in from the side, line it up into my punch, and take a little bit more off the bottom. There we go. So line up your strawberry image into your punch. If you need to take a pick tool to do this, that can also help. I think I've got that there. There we go. Punch that through. There is my first strawberry done. I'm just going to get rid of all of these little pieces that punched out as well. And then we'll do the second strawberry. So again, just making sure you've got that lined up nicely in the punch. You've got a nice even border around the edge. Punch that through, send pieces flying everywhere. And get rid of those scrappy pieces. So one more bit of punching left to do for this. To go with my centering piece, I want to use a piece of the Very Delightful Designer Series paper. Now this is in your sale-a-bration brochure. It's one of the products that you can get free. This and a coordinating stamp set called Berry Blessings comes actually together as a bundle in the sale-a-bration brochure. So you get that and the stamp set together free for any order that is £90 or more. And I'm going to punch out a circle of this designer series paper. So I'm going to use this lovely piece of paper here that is covered in berries and leaves, just with my 2-inch circle punch again. And I want to try and get a nice circle on this that's going to have some interesting bits in it. Let's have a look. That one looks good. So I've got a strawberry and some blueberries and a raspberry on there. Just going to punch that through. And that is all of my punching done as well. So let me pop that punch out of the way. and we can move on to the next step. So next up, I'm actually going to be doing a little bit of embossing. Lots and lots of different steps on this card today, but it comes together to make a really gorgeous card. So hopefully you will agree that it is worthwhile at the end. Popping my pieces to one side, what I have here is my Balmy Blue Matte, and I'm going to be using the Subtle 3D embossing folder, which looks like this. Hopefully, if I hold this up a little bit closer, you should be able to actually see the texture on that. So it is incredibly subtle, as the name suggests. It just gives this sort of slightly sort of paper grain, I guess, texture to your paper. And I'm going to lay my piece of cardstock into the embossing folder and pop that closed. The plates that I'm using for this, I've got my base plate, plate 1. I'm going to pop my embossing folder with my cardstock in it onto there, and then I have plate 4 that I'm going to sit over the top. I'm going to bring in my Stampin' Cut and Emboss, and we're using the big machine today. This is a little bit too big for the mini. So open up the edges. And then I'm going to feed this in to the machine. Now it is very important when you are using embossing folders to make sure that you are feeding it in with the hinge end first. There is a very good reason for this. So as you are rolling your embossing folder through the Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine, it's going to start to push pressure along the embossing folder. So if you start with the hinge end, because then the other end is open, all of that pressure and sort of any difference in the top and bottom pieces, if they're not perfectly aligned, will just work its way out to the end of the folder, and that'll be fine. If you were to start with the open end and work towards the hinge end of the folder, if at any point the top and the bottom weren't perfectly aligned, by the time you got to the hinge end, which would be the last part to go through, the folder wouldn't be able to move anymore. It's held together at the hinge end, and you actually then can end up cracking your embossing folder. So always put it in hinge end first, and you shouldn't have any issues with that at all. So here is my embossed piece of cardstock. So again, I'm just going to hold this up so hopefully you can see all of that pretty texture that it has added to that base layer of cardstock for me. Very subtle, as the name suggests, but it just gives a nice bit of extra background sort of texture to your card. So now I have all of my pieces ready to go, it is time to assemble the card. So first of all, with my card base, I'm going to fold along my score line. Taking my bone folder, I'm just going to burnish that score. Make sure our card stays nicely folded. I'm going to take some liquid glue and add on my embossed mat first of all. So as always with the liquid glue, I just want a nice thin bead of glue around the edge of my cardstock. And then a little bit across the middle just to make sure it is held firmly in place. And I'm going to add this to the front of my card, just making sure I have a nice even border all the way around the edge. Wiggle it into place if you need to, and then smooth that down. You may need to do a little bit of extra smoothing with this because it is embossed. Not all of the paper is going to come into contact with the other layer. So you do need to just make sure that the parts that are in contact and have glue on them have nicely bonded on there. Now I'm going to add my stamped and coloured mat in exactly the same way. So again, just a nice thin bit of glue around the outside edge of my cardstock and a bit across the centre. And again, putting this into place onto the front of my card, just making sure I have that nice even border around the outside, and then smooth that into place. I'm going to add the inner mat for my card as well. So now that I have my front and my inner mat in, it is time to add on the rest of our decoration pieces. So I'm going to take first of all the piece of designer series paper and my sentiment piece, and I'm going to stick them together slightly offset so that you can see the designer series paper behind the sentiment. So just taking some liquid glue over one half of my sentiment piece. I'm then going to pop that onto my designer series paper so I can still see that strawberry and a couple of those blueberries and some of the other bits in the background. I'm going to pop that over and I'm going to use some stamping dimensionals to pop this onto my card front. So I have here just regular size dimensionals today. I'm just going to put 3 across the back of this piece of card and DSP. Squeeze those down, make sure they're nice and firmly on there, and take off their backs. And I'm going to add this to my card towards the bottom right corner, making sure that my sentiment is nicely straight on here. There we go. And as I said, that piece of designer series paper nicely covers that slightly whiter bit that we had in the background stamping that we did there. Next up then, I'm going to add on my little flower. Now I'm going to give this a little bit of texture with my bone folder. So flipping it over, I'm literally just going to curl the petals between the bone folder and my thumb, just to lift them up ever so slightly. It just helps to break down some of the fibres in the paper so it gets a little bit softer and you can curl it up. I'm then going to take some liquid glue and just put a nice dollop of that onto the back of my flower. And I'm going to stick that into that white space that we left towards the top of the sentiment. And now I'm going to add on my strawberries. So first I'm going to add my little stems onto the actual strawberries themselves. So again, just tiny bits of liquid glue going onto the back of here. You don't need too much for this, you don't want it to squeeze out of the edges. And then just add your stem onto your strawberry, just like so. And I'm going to repeat that with the second one as well. And now that I have my stems on my strawberries, I'm going to add those to the front of my card. And again, I'm just using liquid glue for these today. So the first one I'm going to add coming out of the side of my designer series paper down here. And the second one, just a little bit more liquid glue onto the back of there. And I want to add that slightly further up the card. The last thing then I'm going to add to the front of my card today, just to finish it off, I have some of the gold glitter enamel dots. Now these are really gorgeous. They are a gold base and they have sort of holographic glitter contained in them. And I'm going to add a couple of these to the front of my project. So as always, when I'm using enamel dots, I'm going to use my Take a Pick tool with the pointer end. I'm going to take the third size up first of all. I'm just going to bend the sheet ever so slightly to pop off the first one of these that I want and get it onto the end of my Take a Pick tool. And I'm going to add this to the centre of that little flower that we have put onto the sentiment piece. And then I'm going to grab a couple of the smallest sizes of dots. So again, just bending the backing sheet slightly so you can get your Take a Pick tool underneath. And what I want to do is just add these to some of the flowers in the background. So just one there. I'm going to add one more. And I'm going to pop that on this one just here. And that is my finished card for today. A very fun and fairly simple Workshop Wednesday project. There's a lot of different little steps to it, but hopefully you agree, nothing too taxing, and the end result is really cute. A nice, fresh and fun card, perfect for someone's birthday. Thank you very much for joining me in my craft room today. I do hope that you have enjoyed this project. If you have, please give the video a like, consider subscribing to the channel so you'll be notified every time I post a new video. If you have any questions or comments about the project or the products that I've used or anything to do with Stampin' Up, pop those into the comments below and I'd be happy to help you out. All of the products that I've used today are available through my store with Stampin' Up, and there'll be a link in the description box below for you to my store where you can shop those directly, along with a link to request a catalogue. So if you are based in the UK and you don't currently have a demonstrator and you'd like a copy of our physical catalogues, use that link in the description and I'll be happy to get those out into the post for you. Thank you again for joining me today. I do hope to see you in my craft room again very soon. Bye bye.